Did you ever want to get into cloud computing? Becoming a cloud computing professional can lead to a career that is both financially and technically rewarding. The demand for cloud computing professionals is constantly growing, and companies are looking for these professionals in record numbers. Becoming a cloud professional does not require a college degree, and the best part is that entry-level roles are consistently available in less than 6 months of preparation. One of the best ways to get started is to get prepared with the best training and then prepare for interview with an experienced coach. Tech Commanders is here to help you go from knowing nothing about cloud to a cloud superhero. Join Tech Commanders and CloudInterview ACE today. It will change your life.
All right, well, welcome. So what we want to do today is I just want to go through a presentation quickly, and I'm going to go through some demos. And I'm also going to provide you great resources as well. There's an ebook, a presentation as well. And I'll also be emailing out a crib sheet that I'm having developed. The developer is about 3 days behind, unfortunately, on that. So I'll email that out to everybody. Now, I've been teaching this cloud engineer sort of intro, I guess you call it, for about 3 months now. The great sessions. We've had one actually live in person in Jacksonville as well. So there's quite a bit of interest in this. I have to say I'm a little surprised by the amount of interest, so that's really great to see. So let's go through a quick introduction of the course flow. Now, as far as, let me just get my thing out of the way here. It was raining today and I decided to just leave that over here. Okay, there it is. That way it's not in my way here. Okay. All right, I usually have a different setup today. So, all right, so generally, as far as what we're going to talk about, what is a cloud engineer? This is a term that's used pretty loosely in the industry. So you'll see roles that'll say like, cloud architect, network security engineer. I always like the developer ones that are masked as a cloud engineer. And I'll go through and I'll show you a few LinkedIn roles as well, just to give you an idea of what you may be looking at. We're going to talk about why you should become a cloud engineer, what a cloud engineer does day to day. This is a common question I get because a lot of folks, they want to get into IT, but they're not sure if they're going to like what they're doing or they're technically adept enough to do it or whatever, they're thinking. So I'll go through, I'm going to talk about, I'm also going to walk you through a demo on AWS as well and talk about what you might do day to day and just give you some insight. Now, as far as some of the other skills, for example, we'll talk about those other skills that you might need. Career path, how do you get started as well? And I'll talk about that. I'll also talk about salary expectations. One of the questions, that's pretty common is, what can I expect basically as a cloud engineer starting out? Well, what is the base salary? And that's a good question. I can't answer what you might get offered, but I can answer what I've seen other boot camp and students and people that I know, friends that I work with, what they started out as. So because of that, I could give you a range as well and talk about an insight on that. Now, of course, it depends on where you're located a lot of the time. So we'll focus on that when we get to that point. Training, how do you get training? What are the options out there? Coaching. Now, one of the best ways to get ready for an interview is to have coaching. There's no question about it, especially if this is going to be your first time interviewing for a role. You're going to be nervous. You're going to be sort of like, well, what can I expect? I mean, what about if they ask me to draw on a whiteboard, which is one of those things that people don't realize they should know is how do you talk about, briefly a quick design on a whiteboard. These are some things that you might run into in these interviews. We'll talk about some of the techniques. I'll go through some practice interview questions as well. We'll, of course, go through some demos, as I had stated. And then I'll talk about a roadmap to continue and then I'll provide you additional resources, and then we'll go ahead and close out the course as well. All right, now as far as the course expectations, we'll talk about some of the demos. We'll go through advice on how to get started, some of the documentation links as well, and all that fun stuff. Now, quickly before we get started, Joe Holbrook here. I've been in IT for 25 years or so. I hate to date myself, but I've been around the block. I've been in pre-sales roles, post-sales roles, pre-sales roles. I work for major vendors and integrators. I've also been in the military, worked for the Beltway Bandits, and I've taught probably, well over in person, 2,000, 3,000, probably 2,000 people in person, 15 people in a class, let's say. So quite a bit. And then, online boot camps and courses, thousands and thousands as well. I've been pretty well published as well, from a book and course perspective. So I have a lot of experience working in that area. Now, what is a cloud engineer? Hello, Woodrow, welcome aboard. What is a cloud engineer? This is one of those questions that when you look at like the jobs, for example, it can be pretty confusing to know what a cloud engineer is. Even to this day, I'll look at LinkedIn posts for jobs and I'm like, that's not a cloud engineer at all. They want, a Golang developer or something. And that, this is what you might run into, but let's clarify what it is. And then I'll walk you through some examples. So a cloud engineer is really a technical role. In other words, this is a role that you're more of an individual contributor. You're more of a, you'll be a team player, of course, but you're going to be the one, in a lot of cases, provisioning accounts. You're going to be the one putting the infrastructure together. You'll be deploying Kubernetes with developers. You'll need to put together code for, let's say, Terraform or something. These are things that you might have to do. And it's a technical role. So if you, just want to sell, then this might not be the role for you. So I just like to put it straight and honest. I don't try to make the role sound like it's, it's a fantasy and it's perfect. It's a tough role. It's going to be challenging, and that's why there's a lot of demand. You can definitely be challenged technically. Also, too, when we look at what a cloud engineer is, it varies quite a bit when we go from company to company. And this is the challenge too that, I see a lot of people try to deal with, because they get frustrated looking for jobs to apply to or talking to recruiters. And the reality is that a cloud engineer could be a cloud architect, could be a systems engineer, could be a security engineer, could be any one of these roles depending on the company. And you'll need to look at your skills and, see how it fits in from that perspective. Now, how do you become a cloud engineer if you're already in IT? So for those folks that are already in IT, your job is already a lot easier than someone that isn't. Now, I've taught different boot camps for different companies, for example, that would have literally Uber drivers in there. We had, one person that was a seamstress. Then there's people that might be, already IT support. And then we have students that are just new to everything and, didn't work yet in life. So it all depends. But the point is that if you're already in IT, you're already technically, further along than a lot of people. So you're going to have an advantage, I think. And, if you're in IT support now, or you're a DBA, a systems engineer, network engineer, great fits to become a cloud engineer, because it's almost, I wouldn't say it's like, a lateral move, but it's, horizontal, in a lot of cases. So you're just studying a little bit harder, you're learning a little bit more material, you're practicing more, so you'll get it. Now, what are some of the basic requirements for a cloud engineer? Now, once again, this is where mileage may vary, right? It depends on the company. You typically will not need a degree in a lot of smaller companies. When you move into a larger company, a lot of times you're going to want to see a bachelor's in a lot of cases. And then if you go to some of the companies that are like the top 5 consulting, they may want a master's as well. So the way you start out is typically, again, in a mid-sized company. And, I know plenty of people that have moved into those pretty easily. Question. All right. Yes, absolutely. Madalena, I hopefully I said that name right. Thanks so much for the question. Absolutely. Good luck on your workflow as well. The recording will be sent out after the after it's generated. So rest assured, you'll be able to access it. All right. So why become a cloud engineer? There's lots of great reasons to consider that. Now, one of the top reasons that people consider becoming a cloud engineer is because the growth is clearly there. There's, a lot of great analysts and consulting firm data that points out that the demand for cloud is just not going to slow down anytime soon. Even investment companies are even, saying it. So I always tell people to follow the money, right? Follow the money. It's pretty straightforward. If companies are investing in cloud technology, then probably they're not expecting it to go away. You want to follow, the portfolios that sort of invest in what you're going to be working in. Okay, so as far as salary, right? The salary range is pretty generous in the US. I can't speak for other countries, unfortunately. I know I've looked and, the numbers could be all over the place in euros or lakhs or whatever, currencies might be, let's say. So you'll want to check, your country to figure out what that might be. But in the US, I, absolutely can give you great ranges. All right. Yes. No worries. Thank you. All right. Now, it also, too, most importantly, and this is something that a lot of people overlook, is that there's a reasonable barrier to entry. And what I mean by that is it's not like you have to go and get a 4-year degree and spend $80,000. It's not like you have to go out and, learn 100 things that are proprietary or something. The knowledge for what you are considering, if you're on the call, I assume you're considering, changing careers or, wanting to get a better job in IT, whatever that may be. The barrier to entry is pretty reasonable. I'm going to be honest. I have seen people go from, I know when I coach, a lot of folks, they work like in hospitals. I had one guy that worked in, I think, Minnesota or Milwaukee, up there where it's cold, basically, up near Chicago area. And, he was working in a hospital doing, hospital IT stuff, basically. And, it was a, reasonable barrier of entry for him to learn cloud, for example, specifically Google Cloud. Now, after coaching, 3 or 4 weeks, he was good to go for the interview. So, everybody has a different path. So it's all up to what you feel comfortable, what you can invest in yourself, basically, at the time. Also, to degree, like I had stated, I don't like to tell people you won't need a degree for some roles, because you do. I know some companies that They just want a 4-year degree, and they don't care if it's, liberal arts or IT. They just want a degree. But most companies that want someone that does cloud, that can do it, and not just fill a role in a lot of cases, don't care if you have a degree. They just want you to deploy AWS and break, fix anything that comes up, work with the development teams. It's all straightforward. Okay, now there's some links here for you to review about cloud engineering being in demand. There's quite a bit of articles out there. These are just some. I won't spend the time to go through them, but you'll see that cloud engineering is there. It's in the top 10 pretty routinely for, just about any site you could think of generally. So there's a lot of demand for cloud. Also, too, remember, just because it says cloud architect or cloud network engineer, it's still a cloud engineer. I mean, you still need to put things together and deploy stuff. The role, generally a lot of companies are looking for technical. They really aren't looking for folks that are not technical for these roles. So just be aware that the roles are going to require you to get certified in a lot of cases. So if you don't have a degree, don't worry in a lot of cases. It's just that the way you prove your knowledge as a baseline is to get certified generally. And I'll talk about that coming up as well. So what does this cloud engineer do, right? Now, when I was working a lot of these contract roles, for example, I can say that one company I'd work with was like 10 times easier, whereas this other company was 10 times more difficult. And what I mean by easy and difficult is generally, like, some companies are pretty what are called stagnant, and they're not changing dynamically. Some companies are changing so dynamically that, technically it can be really hard to keep up no matter what you've been doing in life, because they're constantly adding new things or changing on the fly. There's almost no project management. And, some of those startups can be really challenging to deal with. So it just depends on what you want to do. So my advice for folks is, at a high level, understand that, yes, you'll be working probably with AWS, maybe with Azure, maybe with Google, who knows, or any other provider like IBM Cloud or Alibaba, whatever it is. You'll be configuring infrastructure. You're going to absolutely need to know networking, though. One of the things I always recommend folks is to go out and, learn networking. Linux is going to be another area we'll talk about as well. You'll have to connect applications together, monitor the cloud as well. This is something that you may need to do as well. Some other tasks as well to think about is around security, like account provisioning. Another thing that'll come up too, especially in environments where you're going to connect on-prem resources to the cloud. So you'll be working with a lot of hybrid resources. Also, too, it's very fair to say, in a lot of roles, you're going to run into where you might need to know some AWS and some Azure or Google. Now, just a quick little overview for those that are really new to cloud computing. AWS has, and again, the surveys are all over the map, and the way the cloud providers sort of account for market share is a little bit different. So it's hard to get that exact number, but AWS has well over 38% or something of the market. Azure has about 22, 23%. Again, there's links in the back for some of this. And then Google has, I think they had 8%, but it was reported, like, I think in Gartner, I think I just looked at the link the other day, it was like they're up to 12%. But again, and then the rest, the other percentage is other providers like, IBM Cloud, which has less than 5%, Alibaba, Rackspace. So there's a lot of providers out there. So I always tell folks, chances are you'll probably want to focus on AWS first and then worry about the other providers later, unless if you're in an area where it's heavy Azure. Now, I will say, if any of you, and I would have loved to do introductions today, but with the number of folks and time that we have, it was just not possible. Like in Jacksonville, Florida here, it's an Azure town. There's a lot of Azure demand. You won't really find Google per se around here, maybe one or two roles. And then basically AWS is sort of, I think even has less market share than Google here. So, and that's, from someone who's been out in the field talking to people. I don't see many roles. I haven't worked one day in my life in Jacksonville, even though I work here. So that's what I tell people. So, from a tech perspective, most of the roles will be remote anyways. And a lot of, lately, I would say, I don't know what's going to happen, in the future when hopefully things start, going back to a reasonable state of mind, I would say. But again, a lot of it's going to vary based on where you're at and if you could do remote or not. We'll talk about that when we get to the job search part. All right, now there's a lot of other things that you could be working with as well. I'll get into some of the skills that will tie in. All right, so some of the skills, any questions? Let me just check. Okay, good. All right, now here comes the part that can be a little bit overwhelming for folks that are new to tech. There's a lot of skills you're going to need to build up on. This is going to take some time. You're not going to be a Cisco expert or anything. You don't have to be a Cisco expert to work on AWS. So don't worry about that. You don't have to be a Unix administrator in a lot of cases. Don't worry about that. But what will be needed eventually is some kind of baseline skills around Linux, deploying VMs, database skills, programming skills, networking skills. Security is a big deal now. Again, if there's any questions on these, just let me know. Just to keep this within the 90 minutes, I wanted to, speed up just a little bit. I did want to also point out there's some of the skills here may be new, of course, to some folks, like DevOps. Even if you're in IT, for example, like if you're doing IT support now, let's say, you may not, work with DevOps. You may not even, you probably have heard of it, but you may not have worked with it. So it could be new to you. Containers is another area, right? Kubernetes is, extremely popular to use. And a lot of cloud native based organizations are using Kubernetes, Docker, for example. Virtualization, we're going to need to know how to deploy virtual machines, of course, and be able to deploy these in the cloud providers such as EC2 on AWS or Compute Engine with Google, for example. We'll need to understand the differences between cloud providers as well. And then one thing that can come up as well quite a bit is APIs. APIs are application programming interfaces. I like to call these like connectors to the cloud world, sort of similar to like an on-ramp to the highway. It's meant to make connectivity straightforward to that cloud service, for example. All right, so what is the salary range? And again, as I had stated, this is just the US focused. Right now, like Robert Half Technology had a great survey in 2020 that, and I didn't see if the 2021 was released yet for 2021, but again, that range was about 94 to 159,000 is the range that they're seeing salaries for cloud engineers. ZipRecruiter also has some great data as well. The range for for ZipRecruiter was 128. Also, too, Glassdoor had some great materials as well. You could look at. And again, here's just an example. This is from ZipRecruiter, for example. They're showing, for example, the salary, like the top earners would be 165, whereas the lower earners just starting out would be about 107 $100,000 a year. So that's a pretty respectable salary just starting out as well. And let me check the Q&A here. Like we had a couple pop-ups here. Sorry, I just noticed that one. All right, let me take a second to answer questions. What will software developers going to cloud engineering roles face? Awesome question by Woodrow as well. That's a good question. Now, I will say that if you're already developing software, you already have a lot of the knowledge you'll need. So you're going to be really good at deploying infrastructure as code, more than likely. You'll be great at, connecting APIs. You'll be great at, putting things together and making them work. Now, I think the main thing you might run into is going to be areas such as maybe trying to build up, your IT security knowledge. We all know that, a lot of organizations, developers like to focus on security after they build the application. From my experience, again, everyone's going to be different. So again, depends on your strengths and weaknesses, of course. Another area too that I find software professionals lack in is going to be networking. A lot of networking, you're going to have to really jump up in that area as well. And then, to be honest, to use like AWS, Google, or Azure is, from the GUI perspective, is relatively simple. And since you're a developer, you're already using the command line. So you already know how to use CLIs, SDK kits, and then as far as APIs as well. So you're going to have a leg up on a lot of folks, in my opinion. So I don't see, being a software developer, no matter what it is, unless if you're like an HTML developer, maybe I could see that might be a jump. But if you're already doing Golang and tying in enterprise apps or Java, I think you're going to be finding things a lot easier. Chase had a question. So you have system administration. Okay, excellent. IA, okay, RMF, okay, risk management. Great. Yeah. So I would probably recommend, if you already have IT security experience, then you probably want to go and focus in that area, because if there is an area in cloud that's probably in the most demand in certain markets, is cloud security. And if you're able to build up your experience in AWS, Google, or Azure, I think you'll find yourself in high demand if you're able to sell that IT experience and certifications along with it. Because a lot of cloud roles now do require you to have certifications and security. Like, for example, there was just one organization I just talked to like 3 weeks ago down in Tampa. They're like like an exchange for the stock market. I forgot the acronym that it's like DDoC or something like that. And they require basically someone to have at least a CISSP and then some other certs as well to work in the cloud. So, and then also too, if you're going to be a federal government contractor, you just like added 10 points and another 10K to your probably salary range. So these are just some things to think about if you're in the US, for example. Okay, Rushi Kumar is asking, which cloud provider is better as a career opportunity for freshers? Okay, that's an excellent question. And I think, again, it depends on your market. I can't speak for where you may be at, but I can speak though. Generally in the US, you want to start out, and I'm going to talk about certifications to get started. So I'll hold off on answering a lot of that till we get to the end, because we're going to cover that actually. But generally the certifications that pay more are going to be the professional level certs. But if you're new to the cloud, you got to focus on like Cloud Practitioner or the SysOps, for example, to get started. Okay, and then let's see. I think I've got another question here. A couple more. Okay, Roger is still studying AWS, KCCP, and the SA. No hands-on experience. Okay, no worries, Roger. It's just going to be time and practice. It sounds like you already taken the initiative. That's excellent. And then, okay, yes, no worries, Chase. Thank you. All right, let me clear that up. Okay, and I'll get back to any more questions as they come in as well. When we get to the end, we'll go ahead and speed up just a little bit so that folks would like to probably see some live demos and stuff. So I would like to do that. All right, so let's go first. I'd like to talk about LinkedIn here. And let me pull up my other screen here and go talk about LinkedIn briefly. And oh, that's interesting. I'm getting this Outlook message. That's ridiculous. Okay. All right. Now, as far as LinkedIn is concerned, let me share my screen here, actually. And right there. Okay. So you should be able to see that screen. Let me move this out of the way now. Okay. Now, as far as LinkedIn is concerned, again, I'm sure we've all used LinkedIn, but I wanted to go over here to jobs really quickly and talk about some things that you need to look for when you're ready to look for a role or you're preparing for a role, let's say. Now, one of the things too that you might want to consider before you go jump in to sign up for courses or cloud bootcamp or whatever you may want to do, or another degree, whatever you're thinking, go look at the roles and see what roles are available, where you're located, what are remote, what are the requirements overall. Also, too, I always encourage people to sign up for search capabilities. So make sure you, so for example, when you go to your profile here, just go down. No, that's not what I want to do. Right there. And scroll down. I got to move this. Sorry about that. You want to scroll down just a little bit and, go make sure you add all your certs here, and then get as many recommendations as possible. And then over here, add any projects that you worked on. So if you've done a boot camp, add it. If you have awards, add it. And then any interests as well. So definitely just add as much as you can, because it just increases your search capabilities as well. And then, just keep on adding skills as well. So when you take a LinkedIn course, for example, add that, whatever training provider you may use. So again, a lot of great stuff. And then also too, go in and enable open to work or provide services. So if you want to be a consultant, you have a side hustle, add that as well. You'll be surprised the number of contacts you can get on LinkedIn. Okay, so if you go over here to jobs, I'm going to just do a quick local search here just in Jacksonville. Then I'll look for remote and I'll show you a few things as well. All right, so for example here, this role here I looked at last week with the Cloud Bootcamp we had in person here in town. And basically this one here, they want a bachelor's degree in a technical discipline. So that might rule a lot of people out. Now, for my security guru there that I just was talking about, security certs, they want CISSP or CCSP, for example, or some others. So this is, and then also too, Security Plus. So this company here, they do, of course, a lot of payroll, basically, and a lot of privacy information. So they're very strict on security, for example. This one here is a remote role for a company called PwC. And if you look at this role, for example, they want 5 years of experience. Now, here's the part I want to point out too. A lot of these roles are just what I call slapped together, and the recruiting company or HR just isn't thinking. So you want to go over here and just double check that you're still searching for entry level or associate, let's say, if you're new to the cloud. So you want to filter that out and just make sure, because one of the things too, you'll see here says entry level. Well, entry level is typically going to be, less than 2 years, and then, or it could be associate as well. Depends on, the company, I think. So anyways, just as an example. So what are they looking for? This company, RS Smart, is looking for a great attitude. Okay, that's great. But they want 7 years of IT experience. Okay, nothing personal, but that is not, basically, what is that? Entry level or associate. That's going to be mid to senior. So again, they want shell scripting, Packer. This is one of those job descriptions that clearly their expectations are really high, and doesn't look like anyone's applying for it either, as well, even though it's new. So again, some of these are better than others. Okay, here's another one. This is a remote role. And again, you can see this one here is much more detailed. They want a bachelor's degree, 2 to 4 years of experience with cloud implementations. Again, this is another role that is sort of, not really associate, in my opinion, or entry level. Again, you'll run into that. And then, again, search your areas or just search remote as well. So you could go up here and just search remote, and it'll pop up roles that are remote. And again, you'll find some of these are really good. Some of these, may or may not be as good as others. Also, too, I'm going to tell everybody a little secret here that I learned years ago. I would be very cautious of the dice roles. And I'm going to explain a little story real quickly before we move on. About 5 years ago, I was looking for work, moved down here to Jax, and I learned the hard way that this would be tougher than what I ever expected, just because it's a small town. And I also, too, was senior, and I wanted a high salary. So, again, it was a different world, but it's good. It built me up. It made me do different things. So what I'm trying to point out to people here is try to set up at least 5 or 6 aliases and put in your alias, the site that you put your resume. The reason I'm saying that is you'll be surprised by the quality of roles you're going to get from some of these sites when you apply. Now, Dice was my go-to site 20 years ago, literally, or 15 years ago, for consulting gigs. It was the place you would go. It seems to be different, and also, too, there's some other sites, too, you'll notice that may or may not be as good for job leads. So you'll get calls to be like a healthcare worker, just the dumbest things, So I'm not saying that, this is Dice doing it, but it seems to be, there's a lot of recruiters that are doing this, buying emails and doing this. So my word of advice to anyone looking for a job, doesn't matter if you're new to IT or not, set up 5 or 6 different aliases. And that way you could tell the quality of the roles coming from that site. And you'll be surprised by the results. Trust me. Okay, so enough about that. So let's go over now and continue on. And then I'll go to AWS here and we'll get into a demo. Let me move this. Okay, let me share my screen here. Okay. Now, as far as AWS, we'll go into AWS now and go into a demo. And then after that, I'll talk about career path options. And then we have about maybe 15 minutes or so, and then the rest of the time is for questions and anything you might have. Okay, So let's see here. Let me go back to my screen and share. And I think I have a couple questions as well. Okay, Rafia, do we have to learn Java, Python, languages for CloudFormation? So that's a great question. And I think a lot of that just depends on the complexity of the environment you're in. The reality is that you could do a lot with CloudFormation with just YAML and JSON, but there's going to be environments where that may not be enough. And then also too, generally, a lot of companies now are going to deploying with third-party tools like Terraform, just because it's just much more powerful and customizable. But again, your mileage may vary based on what company and where you're located, I would think. So hopefully that gave you a little bit of insight. All right, so let me go and share my screen here. Where's that? There's screen 3. Okay. All right. So over here to the demo. Okay. So as far as AWS is concerned, this is, of course, the most common cloud provider you're going to run into. But there's no question that the market share of AWS is diminishing. Azure is picking up steam. Google Cloud is picking up steam as well. IBM may or may not be in your area or have a significant market share in the area. So that could be a possibility as well. Alibaba is used quite a bit, especially overseas, from what I understand. So you'll want to pick your provider based on your location. But if you're just starting out, though, it's pretty hard to go wrong with AWS still nowadays. So what you want to do is sign up for a free tier with AWS. So they have, for example, and pretty much I think all the providers have some form of free tier or free credits. For example, like Google Cloud gives you a free tier and free credits, like $300, I think still, at least when I looked last week. And what I'm getting at is try to use the cloud resources to your advantage. Now, the one word of caution I have is if you're new, you may be deploying a lot of resources. And if you forget to deprovision those resources, you'll likely go over the free credits or free tier, and then they'll charge your credit card. Now, the one thing too that I get is if you want to use the free tier, free credits, you do need to sign up with the credit card, basically, to do that, at least from what I have seen, pretty much everywhere. It doesn't matter the country. The option around that is to use Quick Labs, for example, where you could use Quick Labs to go through like the demos. For those not familiar with Quick Labs, it's a great way to start as well. And I'll show that link after I get done with AWS. So let's talk about what we might do as a cloud engineer day to day here. Now, let's say you just got a job as an AWS guru. And let me check the chat. So I want to make sure. Okay, good. Okay. All right. So you may, be hired as an AWS cloud engineer guru, let's say, for this company. And basically, one of the common tasks you'll need to do is deploy virtual machines. So these virtual machines, for example, is basically using compute power in the cloud. Now, to deploy a VM is straightforward. You go over here to launch instances. Now, AWS has what's called a free tier. And if you look right here, it says free tier eligible. So anything that says free tier eligible has basically an AMI that's available for you to use for free within that free tier. Now, you only typically receive in the free tier 750 hours a month of a micro instance typically. So what that means is I could deploy one virtual machine and run it all month and not get charged, as long as it's the right the right machine image and configuration. So I go over here now, just make sure you pay attention to this for those that this is new to, because again, this would cost you money if you're not paying attention. Go over here to select free tier eligible as it's shown there. And then over here, you'll see the micro instance says free tier eligible. So as long as you stick to this instance, it is going to be free in that month, as long as you deploy only one basically in that month. So that's free. So you go down here and basically, and again, I have to move my screen, and I'm just going to go review and launch. Now, again, okay, sorry. Okay, now over here, I'm going to go and select launch. Now, the reality is that for, again, there's probably 100 different options of how you configure this VM. But for time purposes, I'm just going to go ahead and launch and just show you what we can do. So we're going to go ahead and use an existing key pair. And then I'm going to go ahead and select that as well. And launch that instance. Sorry about that. That thing is sticking. I am having, what is that? Let me try that again. Okay, doesn't like to be moved around. All right, so generally, again, this is a really just straightforward exercise on AWS. So you're going to deploy VMs. Now, you're going to go over here. You're going to go ahead and see that VM launched. And then basically over here, you go ahead and click on it. And then you could also change the state. You could terminate it. You could also, for example, go over here and add settings, change settings, for example, as well. Now, another thing that you might run into as well is, you're going to have to deploy storage. You're going to have to go over here and manage costs, for example. So like there's Cost Explorer. This will tell you, what you're spending in the month. Again, this is, for demos, it's not production. So again, not much there to show you. But over here, you go into reports and look at different reports basically for different months. So you create different reports like, this month, was, $4. I spent 416 hours on that VM type. So again, you go over here and just check out basically your costs. And then over here, we have RDS. So RDS is basically a relational database service, which is basically for SQL. And then you go over here and you could, see there's no instances, and then you go ahead and create a database. Now, again, for time purposes, I don't have a lot of time to deploy these and wait, but I did want to answer questions as well. And there's plenty of courses, that walk you through all this anyways. So you go over here, create a bucket, you can delete the bucket, create a new one, create folders. So most of your day as a cloud engineer could be just in this console with some CLI, of course, in most cases. So just be aware it all depends on the organization, your level of experience. So working with AWS will be the best way to start typically. And then, start looking at your market and try to figure out, do I want to learn Google or Azure or whatever cloud provider makes sense to you? Now, personally, AWS is great. A lot of people know it, but for me, I pretty much have focused on Google a lot of the time, just because it's like a niche area still. There just isn't a lot of people that know it. But again, some people prefer Azure. Now, one thing with Azure, you'll really need to probably get really good at .NET, because that comes into play with Azure quite a bit. You'll find that out if you do start working with that. Okay, so let me go ahead and move over to the slide again, and we'll go ahead and do a quick wrap up. There's a few more topics we want to talk about, get to some questions. And again, let me move my screen here. Okay. All right. And where'd that go? Okay, there it is. All right. And I think you should be able to see that. Okay, good. All right, so we talked about AWS briefly. So let's talk about how you get started. Now, as far as the career path, there isn't like a right and wrong way to become a cloud engineer. Because the reality is a lot of these training companies, a lot of these colleges still haven't really kept up or really, formatted what I would call, an industry standard or, in other words, there isn't like, for example, if you go to IT security with the government sector, it's pretty strict, on the DoD requirements you might need to work on certain types of equipment. So there isn't like a standard out there per se. And because of that, some folks will take cloud boot camps and do just fine. Some folks will just take IT courses with, a platform. Some people might go for an internship. One thing I have seen though, are some companies are showing internships. They can be a great way to get started if it's with a company that is actually going to teach you during the internship. Now, if they're going to make you work for free and not teach you anything, then that's not really going to benefit you in any way, generally. And also to cloud certifications. So it's important to note too that there's a lot of certifications out there. I'll talk about those in, I think, the next module. All right, so how do you become a cloud engineer? You need, first of all, you have to set reasonable expectations. I have seen folks be able to graduate like a cloud bootcamp and get a role working in, for example, Rackspace or working with AWS as a support engineer for cloud. So this is something that can happen. I've seen it happen. It's, probably the better results. So I don't want to, say, you take 5 months of training and you're going to get a job in cloud. That would not be something I can promise. But I can tell you that it's done routinely, and a lot of the boot camps have great testimonials. I've taught for them, and I know the students, and I've provided actually references for some of them from the employers, so I can tell you that they were being interviewed. So that's the great part. Now, I generally like to say 5 to 8 months of constant learning. It may take you longer than 8 months. It may take you a year. I don't know. It just depends on your location too. I mean, I think generally a remote role may not be reasonable to get. If you're new to IT, you're going to have to be somewhere with someone to work with you. You'll absolutely need to spend money on certifications though, at a minimal. You'll need to get, a couple of them typically, and I'll go through what those are coming out. There's a lot of great free resources out there, and there's a lot of great paid. So, determine what your budget is and figure it out. Hire a coach, especially for interview preparation the first time. One of the worst ways for you to ruin an opportunity is to not prepare for that opportunity. So I always tell folks, if you don't prepare, then you probably shouldn't expect to succeed. It's just a reality, right? So if you walk into something blind without having some kind of vision of what you might expect and what kind of questions you might get, then that could be challenging for you, especially if it's your first instance, right? Because what will happen is you'll just run right off the road, and that could ruin your confidence. So we don't want to see that either. Okay, set goals and keep them. Yes, the Zoom is going to, Randy, be available. I'll send the link out for that as well right after the presentation here. Okay, certifications. Why get certified? There's any number of reasons to get certified, but the main reason you want to get certified, being new to any industry, is to provide that you have a baseline of knowledge, right? That company needs to see, okay, Jim or Randy or Tushar, whoever, let's say, has a baseline in AWS because they took the cloud for the AWS Cloud Practitioner exam or the Architect exam or whatever. So that provides that baseline, and it should provide a little bit of confidence. Now, do certs prove that you actually know how to do everything or whatever? No, of course not. But it provides that knowledge of, that you have that baseline that they're looking for. Now, what do you start with? Well, generally you want to start with AWS and then consider Google or Azure after to start with, because here's the thing too. If you're brand new to the cloud and you're trying to learn AWS, Google, and Azure all at once, it's going to be overwhelming. So you need to just focus on one target. And then once you get done with that, focus on another one. So it's reasonable to study AWS, the first 4 or 5 months, and then get into Google as well. Now, again, maybe you want to test out these platforms. So absolutely try them all and figure out, well, maybe I just don't like the color. And I had people tell me this, like, I don't really like the feel of AWS, but I like Azure better. Or like, sometimes, the feel can make the difference between you wanting to work in something and maybe you don't. So everyone's different. I can't make that decision for you. You'll have to figure it out. Okay, so let's talk about these certs. So the first one you really probably should consider, and it's the most affordable, is the Certified Cloud Practitioner. So the Cloud Practitioner certification is an entry-level cert. It's not a technical cert per se, but it gives you that business knowledge of AWS that you need to get started with the technical. Then you want to move on to get the SysOps administrator, because the reality is, if you're going to be a cloud engineer, you're going to want to get the SysOps admin. It's a very hard exam, but once you pass it, you should probably be able to assure that employer that you passed one of the more challenging exams in the cloud. The SysOps exam is still sort of known as one of the more difficult exams in cloud. And then you have Google Cloud Associate Engineer as well. This is a great cert as well if you want to learn Google Cloud. Now, there's also a fairly new one with Google as well called the Cloud Digital Leader. That is similar to the Cloud Practitioner. It's a little bit harder than the Cloud Practitioner though. But again, that's a great way to start as well. Then Microsoft has this Certified Azure Fundamentals as well. So this is a great way to start as well. Now, again, whether you go with AWS, Azure, or Google, it's your call. But these are the ones I would consider starting with. And then worry about the professional, for example, certs like specializations and the cloud architect ones. You might just want to wait on that until you get a few months in. But I would recommend, and this is one thing that we do, for example, in our coaching and our coaching programs, is we have the goal set, with the trainee basically to get some of these out of the way, because this will build up your confidence as well. So you have to consider that. Now, the training options out there, there's free and paid. The boot camps. So generally one thing that you might run into is that there's a lot of boot camps. So Simply Learn has a great boot camp. Quick Start Learning has another one. I've taught for both of them. The content quality may vary a little bit, or the coaching availability could vary. It just depends. But overall, they're great ways to start. You consider that. It's, again, but the cost is going to be $4,000 to $6,000 to get started typically. Then there's also Interview Quick Start, which is about the same cost as well. Coaching is typically done hourly. There's packages you could also purchase as well. Meetups, for example, I teach the Jacksonville Google Cloud Meetup and the Blockchain Meetup here in Jacksonville. We've done quite a bit remote, of course, lately, but we're doing a lot more in person as well. So if any of you are in Jacksonville, please consider signing up. We got some great stuff coming for free as well. So for those that are interested, and then seminars and events as well. Now, there's quite a bit of events in Florida here, but if you're in New York or Cali, let's say, it might be a little bit more restrictive. I don't know. You'll have to check. I haven't been keeping up. Coaching. So coaching is a great way to get started. You want to prepare with the coach, especially before your interview. Do you really need a coach to take on-demand courses, let's say? Probably not. But again, if you have questions, some people, they just want to get answers and they don't want to like play around on Reddit or go through support or something. So having someone to contact immediately could be a huge benefit for folks that, are type A and have some money to fork over to get started. So that's an option as well. Now, coaching will enable you generally to get out there and interview quicker, build up your confidence. Also, too, mock interviews. This is a great resource for folks. One thing that I do quite a bit of is mock interviews, and it's one thing that we also do with the coaching is we have like the before and after results. So it's like a comparison of where you were 3 weeks ago to where you are now. And the answers, and trying to figure out, how well you answer and reply is huge. And then also too, whiteboarding is something that you'll need to get into in a lot of cases. So whiteboarding is where you're going to have to go present on a whiteboard, whether it's in person or maybe on Zoom. On Zoom is easier, but in person, a lot of people, I've ran into a lot of people that will just freeze up or just can't, they don't have the confidence to speak publicly. And, I get that. That's, something that you learn and you build up over time. Also, too, a cloud engineer is typically an individual contributor. So in most organizations, they're not really called upon too much, but when they are called upon, they're going to have to work things out and solve problems. And this is something you might have to do. And then if you're a cloud architect, you're going to whiteboard quite a bit. So it is an investment. Okay. Now, coaching is going to cost between $100 to $200 an hour. Depends on the coach you use. But the benefits, from someone starting out can be huge. All right, interview. Let's talk about some interview techniques. So this will be a few minutes and then I'll go to questions. All right. So typically the first interview is going to be your hardest, of course, right? Makes sense, right? You're going into a new situation you haven't experienced before. You're not sure of what to expect. So basically, it'll probably be your hardest. Now, one thing, too, that I hear quite a bit from students is, what do I need to do to get ready for an interview? Well, there's a lot of things you need to do to get ready. And I'll talk about that in the next slide. But the one thing I do want to talk about now is you need to have confidence, right? You don't want to go to an interview without any confidence, right? You're just wasting your time and their time. So build your confidence. The second interview, you should gain more confidence. The third, you should feel confident and be able to really go in there, no matter what the questions are, and answer them to your ability. Now, as part of answering questions, always be honest, right? You don't want to try to, I think there's a term, right? Fake it till you make it or something like that, I think is how it goes. In a cloud engineer role, you're not going to last long faking it till you make it. So because you're going to have technical interviewers and they're going to be challenging. I've interviewed, for example, with AWS and Google Cloud, and I can tell you that generally they like to work in a what I call tier approach. And that tier approach is this. You start out with the fluffy questions, and then you get to the little bit more technical or salesy questions. Depends on the role too. And then you get to the whiteboard questions, and then you get to sort of like I'm going to hit you with the brick questions just to try to rule you out or see how you react. So with that said, one of the things that can come up is you'll need to have confidence in yourself. And that's one of the things that coaching can definitely help you with and getting the right training. All right. One of the things too that comes into play is you have to know your market. All right. So for example, I had mentioned like in Jacksonville, Florida, for example, it's totally different than when I lived in DC. I lived in DC, I lived in San Jose, I lived in Boston. I've probably been in every tech company that you could think of. I was a pre-sales engineer for major vendors. I've met with CIOs and CEOs and IT directors and everyone you can think of. And I can tell you one thing, that the area that you're in can make a huge difference to your success. You have to learn your area. So like in Jacksonville, Florida, it is Azure. If there is a job available, it's going to pay a lot lower than the national average. And it probably, will be Azure. Now that's changing, of course, areas change where we've got an influx of tech coming in here. Jacksonville is actually considered the fintech capital of Florida in the last 2 or 3 years. It's not official. Tampa still sort of has that to a degree, but there's a lot going on in Jacksonville. But what I'm getting at here is if you're in Atlanta, a lot of great AWS roles there, a lot of Google Cloud roles I see, Miami as well. And then DC, there's a ton of work in San Jose, right? It just depends on your market. Now, I can't speak for folks, in the UK or India or China or Australia or whatever. That's if they let you, leave your house or whatever still. I don't know, lockdowns, what they're doing. But what I'm getting at here is you have to know your market and prepare for your market. Okay, some other techniques that, you'll be surprised, because one thing that I do as well is I usually, once a month or so, I don't get a lot of these gigs, but what I typically would do is, a company would say, can you interview this candidate and can you validate, that he's technical and knows Google Cloud, right? Or knows, for example, VMware. Sure, can do that. One of the things that you'll be surprised that people don't do is they can't show up on time. It's really surprising that someone is interviewing for a role that pays $160,000 a year and is just not able to show up on time and, doesn't bring his resume, let's say, and, just little things like that. So also to dress appropriately. You don't want to wear a t-shirt, even if it's a Google interview, right? These are just some of the things you got to, prepare for, right? So you have to sell yourself. The company is, looking to basically buy you, basically. They're paying you. That's what they want to do. So you have to sell yourself to them. Never, be rude to the interviewer, even if they're rude to you, just try to be respectful. All right, one thing too, I want to point out too, if you're a US military veteran, you have some additional benefits that are free on LinkedIn. If you go to the link below, it has the link there. It's for veterans. So if you're a veteran, you are entitled to 1 year free LinkedIn Premium. That also includes LinkedIn Learning as well. So some interview questions you may get could be, for example, how are you doing, Tom? Okay, we're right on the money. All right. How do we, for example, answer some of these questions? And again, I'll let you think about it. This will just give you an idea of what some of the introductory exam questions and not exam, interview questions can be. Now, this could be focused, basically on how you performed in another role. So one of the things we always have to prepare for is be able to answer questions on previous roles. So what do you do if you haven't had a previous role? Well, you'll need to think about something that you learned in school or a project you worked on, or better yet, one thing I had seen a couple years ago that someone that, went to a local college here did is that it was actually a she, and she actually put together a GitHub repository of all the projects that she did. And it was awesome. It was one of the better ones I had seen. And so even though she didn't have experience, the company had said, well, you know what? We could tell that you have initiative. And even though there are actually much more qualified people, they actually, hired her at a much higher salary than what they probably would have, if, with that experience. So these are things that can happen if you prepare right. Okay, so you have to answer the question properly. Now, the second question is why would you select like a certain virtual machine type? Well, again, based on what variables, right? So you need to look at what is the processing power I need? What is the application requirements? Do I need, this much memory, or can I get away with this much? Do I need a micro versus a T2 type or whatever? So these are some of the things we have to consider to be able to go in the interview and answer, well, I would select my VM based on the requirements of the application, based on the stakeholder requirements. You'll need to, of course, answer that a little bit more in detail, but you'll need to think of an answer to a question that is sort of what I would call, vendor neutral. They're not even looking for basically an AWS answer in a lot of cases. Cloud security. Can you give experience about cloud security? Cloud security is coming up in most interviews that I have, been involved with. And, the feedback I received from students and folks that I worked with before is security questions actually come up almost every interview. What kind of cloud platforms have you worked on? Can you explain I worked on AWS and here's what I did, right? Why would you select AWS over, let's say, Microsoft Azure as a migration choice? Well, again, you want to pick the right provider based on the use case, right? Now, for example, if you're migrating, let's say, storage versus virtual machines, you may have different ways to look at the providers. What do you really need? What are the costs? What are the tools available? For example, what are the migration tools available? Like AWS has all kinds of great stuff available. Now, again, you'll need to know in your head what kind of an answer you could, come off pretty quickly with. The last thing too that the interviewer would want to hear is just sort of a sloppy answer that wasn't like, answered well or thought out. So try to prepare just for simple questions like that. Now, again, there's a lot of great resources out there. One thing, please also too, I run the Google Cloud Platform Certified Professionals group on LinkedIn. We have over 4,000 plus members. There's at least 3 to 5 jobs that seem to be posted every day just on that site. And they're all, well, I wouldn't say all, but most are Google Cloud related, cloud engineer, cloud architects, developers. I also see quite a bit lately of cloud security roles as well. Also, too, the meetup group information is here as well. Also, too, Tech Commanders, we have interview preparation courses that are available, and also some new ones that are being launched. So we're putting together basically a full suite of the major provider questions that are a little bit more deeper than what you would get off of YouTube, of course, or some of the blog posts, for example. There's also a program called CloudInterview ACE. This is a session-based service that we're running. It starts March 14th. The link for that is there. What makes this different from like other boot camps, for example, is that you're getting one-on-one coaching included, and it's direct one-on-one. You're not stuck in a group with 30 other people on a Friday night at 9 p.m. Where it might not be convenient. So again, this is a different approach. Information is there. The schedule for it is here. We cover all the major provider questions, coaching calls. There's also a certificate of completion that you'll be provided as well. Also, too, in the links that I provided you, the Zoom link I provided you earlier, there's a free copy of the book that I just put on Amazon, basically called How to Become a Cloud Engineer with No Experience. And that book is in your download link as well, which is in the Zoom chat. Let me check if it's still there. Also, to a copy, yeah, it's still there. And a copy of the presentation is also there for you. I will be sending out a Zoom recording to everyone as well. So let me that. Okay. Also, too, I've got different prep books for some of the cloud exams, such as Google Cloud is really where I focus, but I do have a couple AWS prep books as well. So again, thank you for joining. If there's any questions, please reach out, let me know. I'll make myself available for any questions.